Hi, hello, and welcome everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening for our Livable Future Live event series. My name is Kate Schwanhauser, and I'll be your host this evening. So we'll go ahead and give everyone another minute or so to get logged in. And in the meantime, let me go ahead and share my screen. I just have a couple quick announcements here at the start. And while I do that, if you're just joining us, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. You can share your name, where you're joining us from, and the first election that you voted in. All right. So, great. Let's go over a couple of quick announcements about Zoom just to get us all oriented. So as I'm sure you're all familiar with this by now, you can go ahead and use the chat box throughout tonight's conversation. It's where you can share your thoughts and reactions, and we'll also be putting some links in the chat for you, so keep an eye out there for those. If you have questions tonight during the conversation, please use the Q&A box instead of the chat box. We'll have time at a couple different places in the agenda for Q&A. So as those questions come up, just go ahead and drop them in the Q&A box. If you need to turn on closed captioning to add subtitles to your screen, just click on the Show Captions button that's in your Zoom toolbar to turn those subtitles on. And finally, we are recording tonight's event, so we'll be sharing the link to this recording with everybody who RSVP'd later on this week. Okay, so for those of you who might be new here, Livable Future Live is our monthly virtual education series. So every month we meet here, we focus on a different topic related to protecting our food, water, and climate. So here's a look at our upcoming lineup for the next few months. I hope we'll see you again at a few of these. So next month, we'll be talking about the power of grassroots organizing. And so we'll dig into a couple of our campaigns as case studies to talk about some lessons learned and next steps in some of these fights. In January, we have a really special opportunity to talk with author Nathaniel Rich, who wrote the book Losing Earth, A Recent History. And the book talks about the beginnings of climate denialism and the way the fossil fuel industry spreads misinformation and propaganda. So we're really excited to hear from the author who'll be joining us for a live discussion and Q&A about the topics in the book, how we can overcome those challenges and move forward together. And then finally, in February, we will be talking about carbon capture and storage, or CCS, which the fossil fuel industry is trying to push as a solution to the climate crisis, but we really know it's just a greenwashing scam. So at that event, we'll be talking more about how we are working to stop that. So we'll go ahead and put a link in the chat where you can sign up for any or all of these upcoming events. Okay, so tonight we will be talking about the midterm elections and the red wave that never materialized and where we are headed next. So to kick things off, I have a special video message from Winona Howder, who is Food and Water Watch's Executive Director. So let's go ahead and start tonight by hearing from her.
Thanks for being here this evening and being part of this really important conversation. This last week has been super exciting, and I know, like me, you're thrilled that the red wave never materialized and the Democrats have maintained control of the Senate. We're proud of the role that Food and Water Watch members and volunteers played in the victories. We saw some incredible things happen. Representative-elect Summer Lee in Pennsylvania, she wasn't afraid to talk about banning fracking, and she won. Also in Pennsylvania, Representative-elect Chris DeLuzio, he talked about holding corporations accountable and stopping the price gouging. He won too. In Florida, Maxwell Alejandro Frost took a very bold stance on climate action. He won, and he's going to be the first Generation Z member of Congress. Of course, the drama isn't over yet, with so many House races still in the balance. And then, of course, we have the big Senate runoff on December 6th between Senator Raphael Warnock and his Republican challenger, Herschel Walker. It really takes working together day after day, organizing and raising our voices together to make sure that elected officials know we're going to keep their feet to the fire on the issues that matter to us the most. Things like banning fracking, stopping factory farms, keeping our drinking water safe and affordable. We have to make sure that elected officials know we're watching them and that they're taking a strong stand on the issue. And now the next phase of our work begins. We're going to push harder and faster than ever to ensure that our leaders in Washington and across the country hear us on the issues like clean water, sustainable food, and a livable climate. And you know what? I am not daunted by the challenge ahead. There's always going to be opposition, and it's never been more important than today to win. So we can overcome the challenges, and we're ready to continue pushing all of the policies that are going to create a better world. And we need you to be part of it. And I look forward to working closely with you. And I just want to thank you for all you do.
All right, thank you, Winona. As she said, we are ready for the next phase of work ahead of us, and it's only possible because of all of you. So thank you all so much for being here tonight and being part of this important conversation. As we'll hear more over the next hour with our speakers, this election shows that the issues that we're fighting for every day are important to people. They care about holding the fossil fuel industry accountable for climate change. They care about clean water for all. They're ready to stop these massive corporations from consolidating even further and price gouging everyday people. And Food and Water Watch is continuing to grow a strong grassroots movement made up of people like you to take on these issues. And it's you who makes that possible. So as you participate in tonight's discussion, I encourage you to make a donation to help jumpstart the work that comes next. And because of the importance of this next phase of our work, we have a special early Giving Tuesday match announcement. So any donations that you make tonight will be matched $3 for every $1. So that means your gift actually goes 4 times as far. So to make a gift, you can text the word gift to the number 23321, or you can click on the link that we will put in the chat for you. And I just want to thank you all so much for all of your support. Okay, so now I'm going to bring Mitch Jones to our virtual stage here. Mitch is our Managing Director of Advocacy Programs and Policy. So he leads our work on federal and state policy as well as our political program. So he's going to take the next few minutes to recap some of the key races and important victories we saw in the election and basically give us the lay of the land of where things stand. So thank you, Mitch. We're glad you're here.
Thank you, Kate. It's good to be here. Thank you, everybody who has joined us from looking at that chat all across the country. It's always great to see that our supporters really do spread out from every region of the country. As Winona said, we're all very excited by the outcome of the election. The red wave didn't happen. It turned into a red puddle. And the results of that mean that we're going to have a divided Congress this year. As you are aware, the Senate is currently sitting at 50 Democrats, 49 Republicans, with one yet to be decided in Georgia on December 6th. So that means the Democrats will have control of the chamber. But there's a big difference between 51-49 and 50-50. When you're in a 50-50 Senate, you have to have a power sharing arrangement with the other party, which limits your authority as a majority party. You have an equal number of members from each party on committees, which makes it harder procedurally to get bills and nominations out of committees. So it's hugely important whether or not there's a 51-49 or a 50-50 makeup in the Senate. It's the difference between having an extra vote on committees to move things. And it's also, quite frankly, the difference in the ease of confirming judges. So depending upon the outcome in Georgia, we're going to see a Democratic, although very slim, majority that really has control of the chamber, or we're going to see a chamber in which procedural shenanigans are going to continue to play a role. Now, we did get 2 new Democratic senators that we think are going to be helpful. One is the progressive Pete Welch, who has been a member of a House for many years from Vermont. He's a longtime Bernie ally, and I think is going to be a Bernie ally in the Senate, which will help us move some of our issues. And then, of course, somewhat famously, John Fetterman from Pennsylvania, who has really taken a strong stand on corporate greed and who actually flipped the House seat, or the Senate seat rather, that is determining continued Democratic control of the Senate. Now, we have a little bit of breaking news. If you haven't heard it yet, about 40 minutes ago, all of the news sources have now called that there will be a small Republican majority in the House. Now, we knew this was going to happen, but it's now official. As of about 6:30, the Republicans have gotten to 218 seats in the House. They're going to end up with a majority of probably 221 to 214, so a 4-seat majority. That's going to be pretty hard for them to be able to govern the House with that limited of a majority. I don't know if you all saw that Kevin McCarthy had 37 members of the Republican caucus vote against him or abstain in their leadership election yesterday, which just goes to show that this Republican caucus is divided, and it's going to be really hard for them to control. A lot of people always like to claim that it's the Democrats who are fractious and uncontrollable, but really it's nothing like the Republicans. And, I'll just remind you, what happened under John Boehner, where that fractiousness actually drove him from the speakership and from the House of Representatives. So what we're looking at here is a really deeply divided Congress with extremely slim majorities in both House. And that means that in the next Congress, most of our fights are going to happen in what's known as must-pass legislation. So these are things like appropriations, the Defense Authorization Act, the Farm Bill, because not much else is going to be able to pass. The fact of the matter is that there's going to be a lot of political playing between now and 2024. And the things that are going to move are going to be those things that have to move. And that's where we're going to be on the lookout, as we're going to talk about a little bit later, for opportunities to advance the policies that we believe in, as well as stopping bad policies that the Republicans and, frankly, some conservative Democrats will be passing or be pushing. So, but that Democratic Senate does mean that we will be able to stop or have the opportunity to stop the worst of the agenda for the pro-fossil fuel faction in Congress, for those who don't care about clean water, and for those who don't care about having a sustainable food system. Now, we've been watching a bunch of races across the country because we were excited about the possibility of being able to work with these new members. Winona mentioned a couple of them in her video. The great Summer Lee from Southwest Pennsylvania, who is going to be a unique voice in the fight against fossil fuels because she is an anti-fracking legislator coming from the heart of fracking country. This is going to be a very powerful voice for us. And she, if you have had the opportunity to join us at any of our previous events where she's spoken, she is just an incredible, motivative speaker, a really great personality, and she's going to, I think, have a big impact on this debate in the House. Chris DeLuzio, who's from the same region, is a progressive Democrat who is committed to fighting corporate greed and corporate power. We want to mention Maxwell Alejandro Frost from Florida, who's a progressive organizer, and at the age of 25 will be the first generation Z member. Also, Nikki Budzinski, who's going to be a new member of Congress. She flipped a rural downstate Illinois district. So, winning in areas where Democrats need to win, winning in areas where Food and Water Watch needs allies to advance our policy goals and our vision is a really exciting victory. And we look forward to being able to work with her to push forward our goals as well. But, it wasn't just federal races where we saw some advances and are hopeful that we can work with incoming elected officials. This is also true for governor's races. Now, I'm here in Maryland, where we flipped the governor's seat to the Democrat Wes Moore. We're, really hoping to work with him on some clean energy legislation in the next session of the Maryland legislature. Kathy Hochul managed to hold on to the governorship in New York, and we are very hopeful that she will work with us to ban natural gas hookups in new buildings in New York State, extending the ban from New York City across the state. Tina Kotek managed to hold the Oregon governorship, and we're looking to press her to support our efforts there to put a hold on mega dairies in that state. And also Josh Shapiro, who has been critical of the natural gas industry, managed to hold the Pennsylvania governorship. But it's also not just these big governorships either. There are also other races that are going to be important for our work. In Iowa, the state Senate president who killed the bill that we were working on that would have helped stop the carbon capture and sequestration pipelines that are planned in that state, lost re-election to Democrat Sarah Trone Garrett. And just before we came on this call tonight, the Philadelphia Inquirer has said that the Democrats appear to have flipped the Pennsylvania State House for the first time in 12 years. So across the country, from local races to national races, we saw good results that are going to help us with our issues. Protecting clean water, building a sustainable food system, and ending fossil fuels. Now, it's important that we keep these issues, the quality of the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the food we eat, at the top of the mind of our elected officials. And that's what we do at Food and Water Watch. Every day we're working on legislation, we're getting people out to testify at local city council meetings. We're publishing research on things like water use in drought-stricken California. We're tracking the biggest corporations' annual profits and calling them out for blatant price gouging, and so much more. But we can't do it without you. It's through all of your collective efforts that we can make these issues a priority for our elected officials. Your donation amplifies all this work. So please consider making a donation tonight of any amount to help us start strong with this new Congress. My colleague will put the link into the chat where you can make the gift. Thank you again for all you do.
Thank you so much, Mitch. Yeah, we'll put the link in the chat for you where you can make your gift. And in the meantime, we have a couple minutes to take a few questions.
Okay.
So Mitch, a few have come in while you were talking, so we'll get through a few of those now before we jump into our next section. So somebody made a great point in the Q&A that a lot of times it's these bigger races, the national races that get the most attention, but that, local issues and local races are just as important. So the question is, did we see any notable local victories around the country that are a good sign as well?
Yeah, so in addition to the state house races that I mentioned, there were actually 3 really promising local referendums in New Jersey. We had a strong organizing campaign to get these referendums on the agenda or on the ballot to support community choice aggregation. Now that's a wonky phrase, and it's too bad that that's what it's called. But what it does is it gives local communities the power to control where their electricity comes from for the residents. It gives the authority to the local government to bulk purchase, in this case, renewable electricity for all of the residents in their city, town, municipality, county, depending upon where it's set up. We had 3 of them on the ballot in New Jersey this year. I'm going to level with you. We were anticipating to win 2 of the 3. We won all 3. So that is in Old Bridge, Franklin, and Cherry Hill. So, going forward, those communities now will be able to have this community choice aggregation or community choice electricity, and they're going to have the power to get their electricity actually sourced from renewable sources instead of from fossil fuels. So those local victories, those sorts of races really do make a difference. That's going to have a direct impact, not only on the mix of electricity in New Jersey, but also on, the affordability of the electric bills for the residents in those communities, because as we all know, the price of wind and solar has been going down, the price of fossil fuels have been going up. So we consider those to be really important local victories.
Yeah, that's great to hear, and great to hear that we exceeded expectations, and hopefully we'll continue to see more cities taking up things like this. Okay, another question. Are there any Senate committees in particular that we're looking at for Democrats to have more power in if they do get to 51 seats?
Well, they will have more power in every committee. So just to make that clear, they will have 1 or 2 seats more than the Republicans. In particular, I think we're looking at places like Environment and Public Works, which oversees funding, oversees authorization of funding for our water systems and has a big influence as well on a lot of the infrastructure that's built in this country. We're hoping to use our influence in that committee to continue to fight efforts to expedite fossil fuels. So having more votes there and having more progressives, frankly, in the Democratic caucus, sitting on a committee like it's called EPW in DC, like EPW is important to us. Obviously, the Energy Committee, which is unfortunately still going to be chaired by Senator Manchin, it would also be good to have additional progressive voices on that committee to back up Senator Sanders, who is a member. And also we'd like to see, as we go into 2023 and negotiations over the upcoming Farm Bill, obviously having a more powerful presence on the Agriculture Committee is going to be really important in reforming our food system.
Awesome, great. I know that there are more questions coming in the Q&A, but we have more that we're going to cover in the next half hour, and I think that we will be addressing some of those in the next part of our conversation. So before we dive into that next segment, Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky has a message to share with us, and she represents Illinois' 9th District, and she's a leader on climate issues. So let's go ahead and hear from her, and then we'll dig into the next part of the agenda.
Hi, it's Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, and thank you, Food and Water Watch. Well, there was no red wave. And I have to tell you that I was one of the people who didn't ever think that there would be, and that the pundits and the pollsters were bound to be wrong. But it didn't just happen. As myself, a lifetime organizer, by the way, along with my dear friend Jackie Kendall, that many of you know, who worked for Food and Water Watch for a long time, I believe in grassroots organizing. I believe in mobilization. I believe in turnout, turnout, turnout. And that is exactly what happened. It wouldn't have happened without organizations like you, including you, who made sure that young people came out to vote, that people who wanted to protect our democracy, who want to protect our ability to breathe the air and drink the water, who believed that our rights were in danger, our health care was in danger, and you did it. We did it. The people did it. So we don't know the total outcome, but what I do know is that what lays before us is an existential threat. You know that we have to address right now. It's really getting late to address the climate crisis. There aren't that many really existential threats that we face. Nuclear war would be one of them. But absolutely, if we don't do the significant things that have to be done in the next little while, I'm talking about a few years, months, certainly not decades, then our children, our grandchildren, life on this planet, we don't know what the future could possibly be. So I just say we have to keep it up. It's really good news that we have the Senate. It's good news for the judiciary, which means some of the really bad decisions that could come through the courts will not happen, because we will have control over continue to have control over the judiciary and fight back against the Supreme Court. But even if they take over the House of Representatives, they're going to have a tiny majority. They're going to be fighting with each other. And let's hope they also learned a lesson, that the American people spoke. They don't believe, the American people don't, in going backwards. In the kind of policies that have been advocated, the kind of drill baby drill, and we can make a difference. You can make a difference. We in the Congress can't do it without you. But when you mobilize people, organize people, and get them out, and we've seen the young people stepping forward. We've seen caring people stepping forward, even on both sides of the aisle. They don't want the craziness. We can pressure members of Congress to make sure that really sensible and positive work is done immediately. So again, take pride, feel good. This is a positive moment. This is a hopeful moment for all of us. And let's keep fighting, because when we fight, we win. Say it with me. When we fight, we win. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much to Congresswoman Schakowsky for that inspiring message. She's so right. When we fight, we win. That's just a great reminder of why we are all in this work together. It really does make a difference. And it's because of all of you who fight alongside us on these issues that we know we have what it takes to keep taking on these challenges. So, you can tell us in the chat what's something that's motivating you to fight. And in the meantime, I will bring Mitch back on screen, and we'll also have Emily Worth join us for the next part of this conversation. Emily is Food and Water Watch's organizing director, so she oversees our local, state, and national organizing campaigns that mobilize our grassroots activists around the country. So thanks for joining us tonight as well, Emily.
Thanks so much for having me, and thank you all for joining. It's great to be with you.
Awesome. All right, so let's talk about, what's coming next in our campaigns to protect our food, water, and climate now that we know more about this new Congress. So as we just heard from Mitch, we will now have a democratically controlled Senate. And now we know a House that will be controlled by the Republicans, albeit with a very small majority. So how are we changing our on-the-ground strategies in response to this change in control of Congress?
Yeah, well, I want to start by saying at Food and Water Watch, we always update and revisit our strategies as the political context changes to figure out how we can most effectively use the resources that we have to make policy changes that'll win real improvements in people's lives. And so, we expect at the federal level, and Mitch mentioned this, that there will be opportunities in the next Congress. I actually see some mentions of this in the chat too, to defeat bad bills proposed by the Republicans or, potentially being attached to this much passed legislation. And this is similar and kind of reminiscent of a really big, if temporary, victory that we had earlier this year, where we stopped Senator Manchin's dirty pipeline deal that would have fast-tracked permitting of fossil fuel projects, including the Mountain Valley frac gas pipeline. And I know many of you on this call were a part of that victory. And it was really amazing for me to see people from across the country mobilize. There were more than 10,000 phone calls made to members of Congress. We organized dozens of rallies and events. There were meetings happening both by our members and volunteers and allies in district with members of Congress, as well as I think over 65 meetings on the Hill that just we were a part of. It was really a tremendous kind of grassroots and really well-coordinated effort to stop that bill. And so I know there's questions about what comes next, because we've been hearing that Manchin's not giving up, even though he was soundly defeated with his plan to attach it to the spending bill. Let's all be clear about that. And so we are going to continue to stay vigilant to make sure that we are tracking this and that it does not move in lame duck. And Mitch, I think there's some new reporting you heard today about this. Maybe you can just share the latest.
Yeah, there's been a lot of back and forth about this, as you can imagine. Every day there's new reports. We know Manchin wants to attach this to the National Defense Authorization Act, which is one of those must-pass pieces of legislation I was talking about earlier. And failing that, he wants to put it on what's called the Omnibus Appropriations Bill, which also has to pass, or else the government isn't funded. So that's what he's aiming for. We're hearing now that it's not likely, although still possible, so we're going to keep fighting it, as Emily said, that it will be on the National Defense Act. And the latest reporting, the new scuttlebutt, if you will, is that Manchin has started negotiating with Republicans in both the House and Senate to try to come to a bipartisan agreement with the slimmest number of Democrats that you can imagine, but the gleam of bipartisanship to pass this so-called permitting reform, which really is a fossil fuel expediting reform in the new Congress. And so we're going to keep working. We're going to work with our allies in the Senate. We're going to work with our allies in the House, the same people that we worked with to kill it earlier this fall. We're going to keep working with them to make sure that this doesn't come back. One thing about working on legislation in Washington is just because you kill a bill doesn't mean it's not coming back. Every piece of legislation is a zombie bill. And so we're going to keep working in the field, on the Hill, to make sure that this doesn't come back from the dead.
And, as Emily said, we soundly defeated it the first time. So I know that with all the support of everybody who's on this call, many of you were probably involved in that work. We're ready and we'll take them on again and we'll win again. So we appreciate everyone getting involved. Okay, so, in addition to, things that we're trying to push from a legislative perspective, where else are we retargeting our efforts?
Yeah, we're going to continue to push against the approval of the Mountain Valley pipeline, just even aside from this Manchin deal. As we were kind of revamping our strategy, we were thinking, it's interesting, there just aren't as many big frac gas pipeline proposals aside from this happening, which I think shows that we are making a difference, that the kind of pipeline resistance across the country is making a difference. There are still, I know, Line 5, I know there are others out there, but you're not hearing of new major frac gas pipeline proposals because I think we have just made it so difficult for the industry. They've put so much money into this, and many of these huge projects have either been soundly rejected or delayed, which costs them money. So we'll continue to push on that and really call on President Biden. He has the authority to use his agencies to reject a number of permits for fossil fuel projects that are proposed all across the country. This includes LNG export facilities. It's unfortunate that we're continuing to export fossil fuels at this time of the climate crisis. And so we'll be continuing to push for the rejection and the authority that he soundly has to reject fossil fuel projects. And we're part of a large coalition called People versus Fossil Fuels that has really put a lot of energy into advancing this and really stopping projects across the country. So we're looking forward to continuing our work on that. I don't know if you have other thoughts, Mitch.
Yeah, in addition to that, one of the real bright spots of the Biden administration has been his appointments to the Federal Trade Commission. We're actually seeing the regulators want to do real enforcement of our antitrust laws in a way that we haven't seen in decades. It's actually really exciting. Now, I'm sure many of you heard about the attempt of Kroger supermarket chain to buy Albertsons supermarket chain. This would be merger of two of the top 4 largest supermarket chains in the country. Food and Water Watch research has shown that highly concentrated control of the grocery industry is not only driving up prices, it's bad for us because it makes everything more expensive. It's also bad for farmers. They get paid less on the other side. Concentration in the food industry is bad for farmers, bad for consumers, bad for families. And so we're going to continue to push the FTC to reject that proposed buyout, as well as pushing back against concentration across our food system so that we have a more sustainable food system working into the future. So, that's one place where we feel really confident that we have allies in the Biden administration, and we're going to work with them and push them to make that come true.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And I just put a link in the chat to an article on our website that talks in more detail about the merger that Mitch just shared. Okay, so Mitch, earlier you had also mentioned some state level victories, and a lot of these are going to present a big opportunity for some of our state and local campaigns that we're working on. Emily, I'm thinking particularly of Iowa, where we're fighting carbon capture and storage projects. So can you tell people what's going on there and how some of these election wins will help us in that fight?
Yeah, what's going on in Iowa is really fascinating. We're working to stop 3 major carbon pipelines that are being proposed through Iowa and actually other Midwestern states too. And this idea is that they'll capture the carbon dioxide from ethanol and other fertilizer industry and transport it through these pipelines underground. They claim now that this is not the case, but we know originally the companies claim that this was actually some of the pipelines go up to North Dakota, where it's going to be used for enhanced oil recovery. So basically claiming that this is a solution to climate change, but really it's a scam, and it's propping up both big ag and big energy at the same time so they can continue business as usual. So one of these proposed pipelines being proposed by this company, Summit, is 2,000 miles long, crosses 5 states, including 700 miles in Iowa, and would be the biggest carbon capture pipeline in the world, costing billions of dollars to taxpayers, and much of it subsidized by both the federal and state governments. And so we've been working with allies and especially landowners across the state in Iowa, and who've really been rising up against these pipelines. They simply don't want them. And the company has not been able, especially Summit, one of the pipelines we've been doing the most work on, hasn't been able to get landowners to sign the easements that they need to run the pipeline across their properties. And so what they've done is petition the Iowa Utilities Board to allow them to use eminent domain so they can seize the land for the construction of these pipelines. So they're trying to make the case that these are in the public interest. And needless to say, farmers and other landowners from all political backgrounds in Iowa aren't buying this. They don't think that this is in the public interest, and they're concerned about the impacts to their property value, their health and safety. There's actually been a carbon dioxide pipeline explosion in Mississippi that caused major health problems there. And also their property values, and they're worried about their crops not being as effective. So it's been really, really interesting to see this coalition come together, like I said, of groups from all political backgrounds. And in this year's legislative session, we worked with a coalition of landowners and allies to move legislation that would not allow the use of eminent domain for these carbon pipelines. It actually ended up being attached to a budget bill in the State House, but Senate President at the time, Jake Chapman, blocked it from moving in the Senate. Likely at the bidding of the governor and other senators who've gotten, millions of dollars in campaign contributions from the main company behind this summit. So as mentioned earlier, we're super thrilled because independent redistricting redistricted Senate President Jake Chapman into a district with a really dynamic Democratic candidate, Sarah Trongeria, and she defeated him in the election. So we are going to work again this year to get this legislation reintroduced. There's been just a lot of momentum building for this, and we're really excited to see what we can do in passing this through the legislature this year.
Yeah, that's great to hear that we have this new opportunity. And I know that this is going to be one of the most important fights for us in 2023 because of the way it could set a really big precedent. So, what is a good way that people can support this fight?
Yeah, I mean, we're taking on the biggest corporations here, and this is precedent setting because carbon capture and sequestration projects are being proposed across the country. So this is a huge opportunity for our movement to push back against this scam. So your donation would help us build up our local organizing team on the ground in Iowa. This will generate the hundreds of phone calls to local elected officials, engaging these landowners to show their outrage to their elected officials, and to show up at the Public Utility Board meetings and voice our opposition. So together we can make it very difficult to move these projects forwards, and we can stop them for good. So anything you can give tonight would really have a huge impact on this fight.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you to everybody who has already made a gift tonight. We are just so grateful for your generosity. We really appreciate all of your support. Okay, so that is awesome news about Iowa, but I'm sure there are other places that we are just as excited about. So what are some other big opportunities locally and at the state level around the country?
Yeah, well, we're super excited about our state legislative plans in New York. We're working to pass, it could happen in the state budget or through the legislature. Mitch referenced this earlier too, a bill that would ban new gas hookups at the state level. And this really comes on the heels of a big victory about a year ago at the end of last year, where we banned new gas hookups in New York City. And so we have been building, didn't quite get it through the legislature earlier this year. But bills like this don't often take more than 1 year to move through the legislature. And so we are really excited. We've been spending all summer and the fall building the power that we need to move it through the legislature. In New York, we're also hoping that Governor Hochul will sign a cryptocurrency mining moratorium bill that would pause new and renewed air permits for fossil fuel power plants that house this proof of work cryptocurrency mining. They're kind of taking old mothballed fossil fuel plants and bringing them back online at a time we need to be retiring them for good for cryptocurrency. And so this bill that passed the legislature in the spring is awaiting the governor's signature. So I just want to mention it would be the first of its kind across the country if she signs it. So we're continuing to push for that as well. And then one more thing that I'm really excited about is passing a factory farm moratorium in Oregon. This year we're working, we've got mega dairies, but also increasingly chicken factory farms that are causing public health and environmental crises in the state. And so we've been working out to build the strongest coalition we've had to date, and really been working to build political power to move this session. And as Mitch mentioned, we're really thankful that Democrat Tina Kotek won in a tight election for governor, so that we have a chance to actually move this bill this session. So I don't know, Mitch, if there's other things you're excited about, but yeah, those come.
Yeah, there are. And, we've got, I mentioned earlier that Wes Moore was elected governor of Maryland, and we're hoping to work with him. We have a piece of legislation that's a priority for us in Maryland that would remove from the renewable portfolio standard, which is the method by which states determine what counts as clean energy and what gets basically a subsidy to try to reduce the carbon emissions of the electric generation. Here in Maryland, unfortunately, it includes factory farm biogas. It includes, we have a chicken industry, and it includes the chicken litter and the methane from that. We're deeply concerned here at Food and Water Watch that once you start to attach digesters and electricity to CAFOs, you are going to lock in industrial agriculture, and you're going to actually also increase concentration of CAFOs in certain areas because they need it in order to feed the electric generation. And so we're going to have a piece of legislation to strip that biogas out of the state's RPS, Renewable Portfolio Standard, and we're really hopeful that our champions will be able to get that through the legislature, and that the new governor, unlike the old governor, will be willing to sign it.
Awesome, great. All right, so clearly we have a lot going on. We have a lot of big campaigns ahead of us. So Emily, could you tell everybody, what is the best way they can stay engaged and get involved in helping us with these fights?
Absolutely. Volunteer with us. We need everyone. We need all hands. We have a Food and Water volunteer network, and we are so excited. This is something we've been really building out over the past few years, and we work with volunteers all across the country, and they help us win the policy changes we're talking about today. And we have lots of different ways people can get involved because people like contributing in different ways. So we have teams of people that make the phone calls. I know not everyone likes phone banking, but it's really important. And we do have a team of people making phone calls. We have other volunteers that send text messages. And what we do is we identify key moments where we really need some additional help to move our campaigns forward and across the line. And so people text with us. We're building out a team of volunteers writing letters to the editor. And we also are building out a team of grassroots lobbyists in key congressional districts across the country who can do things like meet with their members of Congress in district when something like the dirty mansion deal pops up, or they can deliver important letters to their members of Congress in district. And we coordinate with our lobby staff in DC with our volunteers in the field. And then we have teams of volunteers working really closely with our organizers on the ground in the places that is possible. But you don't have to be in one of those places to get involved. And so I just want to mention, actually, tomorrow night, we have a first-time volunteer action meeting. Everyone is welcome. We'll share the link to register in the chat. And we also have a mobilized page, which is kind of a ongoing place you can look for ways you can get involved with Food and Water Watch. And that includes events both in localities where we have staff, as well as national events and volunteer meetings. And so I urge all of you to check that out. And thank you to all of you who are already volunteering with us. We couldn't do it without you.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, huge shout out to all of our volunteers. You all are really driving this work. You're making it happen. So we're just so appreciative for all the time and energy you commit to Food and Water Watch. So definitely check out those links that we just put in the chat for you. Okay, we are getting close to the end of our hour, so I want to take a couple minutes now to go back to some of our audience questions that have been submitted. So the first one that I have here is there was a comment about state attorneys general taking action on corporate grocery mergers. How is Food and Water Watch following this?
Yeah, we're aware of that. There are also the Attorney General in the District of Columbia has intervened, and in a couple of other states. We are currently setting up meetings with allies in the antitrust community, the anti-monopoly community, as well as others, to strategize about the best way to fight back against this. We're going to obviously pressure the Biden administration and the FTC to continue to do the right thing on these sorts of issues. And we're going to work with allies in Congress. There have already been letters sent by members of Congress, people like Elizabeth Warren, to the FTC, to the administration, asking them to stop this merger. And so we're going to work with our allies on Capitol Hill. The fact that the Democrats held that this is one of the places where this is important. The Democrats holding the Senate means we might be able to see hearings into this merger to reveal what it's really going to cost. And we've already seen some questions actually asked about it. So we are monitoring this. We are strategizing about the best way to stop it. And we're going to continue to work with all of our allies, grassroots partners. As Emily said, the volunteers are always helpful, especially when you talk to your member of Congress when they're back home. That's the thing that they remember. Constituents, talking to them, then they'll know that people really care. So we're going to continue to put that pressure on and build the right strategy to stop it.
Awesome, thank you. It looks like there were several questions about pressuring Biden on line 3 and line 5. So what are we doing to pressure Biden on fossil fuel infrastructure around the country?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, we're part of a coalition of more than 1,000 groups called People versus Fossil Fuels. And that is exactly the goal of that coalition, is to push President Biden to reject permits that are within his control for new fossil fuel projects, including the ones mentioned. So when there are public comment periods about them, we work with all the groups to just flood the office with comment periods, hold actions where we deliver them. And we've held many rallies and other actions across the country as well. We've shown up at events to put pressure on him. And so there's lots of ways that we're making sure that we get this message out and really putting pressure on the administration to reject those projects. And we'll continue to do that going forward.
Great, thank you. Okay, we've also gotten a few people say that they either have a new representative and a few say they have a new Republican representative. And they're asking, how can they get through to them? For people who have new representatives or representatives they don't necessarily agree with politically, what advice do you have for them on how to push them on issues that you care about?
Well, again, going back to what I think Emily and I both alluded to a minute ago, it's direct contact from constituents that moves legislators. If they know that they have constituents who care about a particular issue and believe a particular way about an issue, that's going to ultimately matter to them. So, join the volunteer program, help organize your friends and family and neighbors who live in your community, and learn how to get a meeting with your member, whether they're Republican or Democrat, whether they agree with you or don't, it doesn't matter. Get that meeting, go in, speak with them. We have done in the past lobby trainings for volunteers. And that's the thing. But also, pick up the phone and make those calls, send those texts. You just have to keep the pressure up and make sure that the member hears you, because that's the most important and most effective way to either secure their vote, change their mind, or weaken their opposition.
And I just want to reiterate that through the volunteer network, we're offering training and we can offer support for people that are trying, for the first time, trying to reach out to their members. And, I just think back to when we were fighting the Manchin deal last year. If you read the news articles, it was inevitable. It was going to happen. There was nothing we could do. But what we did was mobilize people across the country, and they put pressure on their members of Congress, and it didn't happen. And so it really does make a difference. And yeah, we are, through our volunteer network, we're there to provide the support and training that you need to get engaged.
Awesome. Thank you. We're going to do one more question and then we'll have to wrap things up, unfortunately. So we had a question from Marty about changes at the state level in Pennsylvania. Mitch, you mentioned the Democrats took the state house, but there's also a new governor as well. So what should we expect in such an important state politically and for fracking?
I think I'm going to defer to Emily on that, who's actually a little bit closer to what's going on the ground in Pennsylvania than I am.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have an opportunity. Josh Shapiro, for those who haven't been following, was the Attorney General before he, became governor. I guess he is still the Attorney General, but anyway, before running for governor, and actually issued some reports that were very critical of the regulation of the industry and the problems it was causing for people across the country. So I think we have a huge opportunity to push to get more accountability and to really take on the fracking industry and call in the governor. And it really does help to have the state house too in that state. And so we look forward to coming up with a strategy to most effectively do that moving forward. But that'll be what we're figuring out in the coming weeks.
Awesome. And we'll definitely need the support of everybody on this call. So we're just really grateful for all of you for taking the time to be here tonight. We're coming up on the hour here. So I'm going to go ahead and just share a couple final reminders and announcements for folks before we close out for the evening. But really just want to thank you, Mitch and Emily, for joining us for this conversation and sharing all of this great information and resources. So we appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
All right. And thank you to everybody who submitted all those great questions and for participating in this discussion. So just a quick reminder that that special match will be live through Giving Tuesday, which is the week after Thanksgiving. So again, I just want to thank everybody who has already made a gift tonight. Thank you so much. With your support, we really are going to start out strong with this new Congress. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we do have a couple of upcoming events in our Livable Future Live series over the next few months. So I hope you'll join us for some of those. Next month, we'll be talking more about the power of grassroots organizing by looking at a couple of our campaigns as case studies. In January, we will hear from the author Nathaniel Rich, who wrote Losing Earth, A Recent History. And don't worry if you haven't read the book, you can get it from your local library, or you can join us even if you haven't read it. It'll still be a really interesting conversation. And then in February, we'll be talking about carbon capture and storage. So we'll be really diving into what Emily shared earlier tonight about our fight in Iowa and how we're working to stop those pipelines. So we really hope that you'll join us for that one. We'll put the link in the chat for all of those events that you can sign up for them. And yeah, finally, just want to thank you all so much for joining us today. You'll get an email or a text message later tonight asking you to submit feedback about the event. So please leave us a comment. Your feedback is really helpful for us. And then later in the week, I will be sharing the recording from tonight's event. And there were also a lot of great resources shared in the chat. So don't worry, I will also include all of the links in that email that we shared in the chat. So you don't need to worry about saving all those. We'll make sure you have them. And feel free to share any of those with family and friends as well. So thank you all again. And I hope you all have a great evening.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.